Hello crafty people, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me again if you're already a subscriber, and also if you're new here, I'm happy to have you on board, so please stick around and learn a few, hopefully learn a few interesting techniques that we're going to use to create this cute little card today. So if you want to learn about how to create stenciling and texturing within your stencils, how to create doodle backgrounds, as well as how to colour your images with alcohol pens, then you're in the right place. So let's begin with this card. I'm using a Lili of the Valley stamp today, which is from their latest release. And I'm just going to bring in the cover to that set. Here we go, and it's called Hi Honey, and I've already done a video with the little bee, which you'll see in my previous videos, and today I'm going to use our bear with his little pot of honey and some honey pots. So we're going to learn a little bit about masking techniques today as well. For my stencil, I'm using a Tracey Hey stencil, which is called Honeycomb. No surprise there. This is it, and what I love about it is it's got these sort of hidden little hearts within the honeycomb, which I think is really nice. But of course there are plenty of other stencils out there with a similar honeycomb feel to them, which you can of course use. So let's get down to our card making. I'll just get these bits out of the way for now. And we're going to be using a 6x6 card for our finished card. So I'm bringing in my white layer, which is going to have my images on it, and I've cut mine to be 5 inches square. You can just adjust that up or down as you please, but that's what I'm using. Now then, we're going to be doing a bit of masking technique today, but before we do that, I do just want to get some grounding down just to figure out roughly where I'm going to put everything. So what I'm going to do is pick up one of my stencil brushes, which I've got here, and I'm just using what's left over of my ink really, and I'm just going to make a ground line just by running back and forwards, just like that, ever so simple, and then dragging down. Now if you haven't got enough ink left on your ink pad, on your stencil brush, that's not a problem. You just go in and grab a little bit more, but that's what I'm doing for now, and that gives me my guideline, which I can then come back to later on if I want to add some more. And as I mentioned, we're going to do some stamping and we're going to do some masking, but multiple masking techniques. So the real rule that you need to remember for this is that you put the thing on the front that you want to see the most, and then we work our way backwards. So what my plan is, if I bring my card back in for a moment, is I'm going to have a honey pot at the front here, one behind, and then my bear behind the honey pots. They're all separate stamps, so what I need to do first is stamp this honey pot, which will be the whole honey pot that we see at the beginning. So let's just go and grab my honey pot stamp and put that roughly in place. But I'm forgetting something quite important here. I need my stamping platform, so I'll just grab that and get all set up. There we go. So in my excitement to get going, I completely forgot about the essential part of having my stamping platform. But of course, if you don't have a stamping platform, you can use an acrylic block if that's what you prefer. So I'm going to give myself an idea of where I want everything before I start committing. So I'm going to probably have my bear around about here, and I need to make sure I've got room for all my honey pots as well. So I'm actually going to move that one over. He's going to come up a little bit, and I'm going to put my first honey pot just there. So let's get that stamped, and because I'm going to be using alcohol inks for my colouring, I'm going to pick a Memento ink pad to do my stamping, and the reason for that is that this is a dye based ink pad, and that means that it won't mix with the alcohol in the alcohol pen, so the image will stay clear and I won't get any fuzziness on my black outline when I start to colour later on. So there we have honey pot number 1, and I need to now protect that, so I have already created a mask and you can see them here. And I'm not going to talk about or I'm not going to go through creating a mask this time, because I have done it on quite a few of my other videos. But that said, I am going to link my little tutorial video about masking in the description that goes with this video. So have a look in the description and you'll find that if you want a more detailed description. But meanwhile, I have stamped my image onto some masking paper, and I'm just going to stick that and apply it over the top of my stamped image just to give it some protection. There we go. It's not quite positioned perfectly, but it's not going to be too much of an issue, I don't think. Maybe I'll just give it a little wiggle. There we are. And then I need to find my stamp again. There it is. And I'm going to reposition that now, ready for the second stamp, which I want to be here. And because I've protected part of my initial stamp, all we're going to get is the bits that are outside of the masked area. So it's going to look like this pot of honey is behind the other one. So I'm going to give that a stamp again with my ink pad, which is just off camera, and give that a nice press down. And it's starting to look a bit messy at the moment, but you will see it all come together once we get to the final stages. I've now placed a second mask on top of my second honey pot, because again I want to protect the honey pot so that I can place the bear next to it, but as if it's behind the honey pot. So here's my bear. No, it's not, that's the wrong one. Hold on, I'll just go and get the other one. To be fair, they're all lovely and they're interchangeable. And that bear that I just had would look equally lovely, but I don't have a mask prepared for that one, so I'm going to go with the one that I started out with, which is this guy here. And as you can see, I'm just placing him slightly over the honey pot and slightly raised. There we go. So just a little tiny bit of his paw is stuck behind that honey pot. And then we're going to go ahead and stamp him as well with my Memento ink pad, which is just off screen. I'll tell you what, I'll flip it around so you can see. There he is. So I'm just tapping my ink pad onto him, making sure I've got ink all over before pressing him down in place. Now, although this masking paper is very thin, it is worth just giving an extra little press where the stamp meets the masking paper, because there will be just a little bit of a ridge there, and we want to make sure that we've got our stamp all the way up to the edge there. And we have, so we're good to go. And the next thing I'm going to do is apply yet another mask over the bear, because we need to protect all of this, because the next thing we're going to do is add our honeycomb over the top. So now we've got our 3 stamps done, and all of them are masked up. So we've got mask number 1, number 2 and number 3, which is going to give everything a little bit of cover so that we're now ready to progress with the next stages. Now I do want to darken the grey floor area a little bit now, so that is what I'm going to do next. I'm going to grab a smaller stencil brush, which will just give a little bit more intense colour, and this time I'm going to just get a grey ink pad, which happens to be a Memento today, and this is grey London Fog. And that's the good thing about these dye-based ink pads, you know, you can mix and match them, and Mementos are not just for stamping, basically they're also for this kind of thing, for creating backgrounds and doing all the things that we do with our distress inks as well. So I've picked some up and This is quite a more subtle kind of grey, so I'm going in a bit more heavily, but it's best to start light and then work your way into the darker areas if you want, because you can always add a little bit more, but you can't always take it away. So I'm dabbing onto my ink pad and then taking some off in my lid and just doing a little dab to get some of it off on a scrap of paper, and that way I can start to apply it, and it will be dark where I first put my brush down, and then it starts to fade away in a sort of airbrushed fashion, and that's exactly the look I was looking for. So that's that bit done, and we're now going to move on to our stencil. And for once, we don't need to really stick it down unless you particularly want to, because we just need to sort of hold it in place really. So I'm going to have a look and just place my stencil where I think it will be nice. And what I'm paying attention to is not this bottom area, but just the edges around here. I kind of want a roughly even distance all the way around, so that the honeycombs are kind of in the middle and don't look like they're off center. Now for that I'm going to use some Elements ink, and I've got two shades. I've got a yellow Sundance, and I've also got Henna, which is a very darker brown colour, and you'll see how that comes in just a moment. First of all, I'm going to just apply a good amount of this yellow, and I'm using a round blending brush because I'm going in to get a sort of softer effect, if you like. Now because I've got my masks here, I am protecting my images so I don't have to worry about going over the top of them. And the good thing is that the stencil being on top, that actually holds down the masks even more, which is handy. And I'm just adding my yellow in there. And you know what, it doesn't matter if it's a bit blotchy. I've got a big blotch just over there. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to just lift up and see what I've got. And I think that's probably enough of that. Now what I'm going to do is add some texture, or a little bit of 3D if you like, using my Henna Elements, if I can get the lid off. There we go. And my smallest stencil brush. Now I could dab into there and then start going, but I've actually got some ink in my lid, and so I'm just going to try that out first. And the idea is that I'm just going around the edges where these narrow lines are and adding some depth and texture. And I particularly want to do that where these hearts are, I've decided, just to sort of accentuate those hearts a little bit. But I'm basically going in, adding some extra where these little thin lines are. And I'm not thinking about which direction the light's coming or anything technical like that. I'm just adding some variety. Might need to just add some extra ink in there. I'm going to give it a good dab on my piece of paper here just to really get most of that ink off. There we go. And then I'm going to carry on. You can see that that's now coming in quite a lot darker. As you can see, this is pretty much doing all of the areas that I need. Let's pick up a little bit more. And let's see what we've got. There we go. So we've got some nice texture, but what we can do is just blend away some of this a little bit with our yellow, what's left over on the yellow. And then we can lift up and we've got some lovely honeycombs there. And now I want to add a little bit more texture, so I'm going to do some splatters with my henna once again. So for this one I'm going to pick up, just put a little dab on my glass mat. That's all I need with these because they're so intense, to be fair. And then I'm going to take some water and my fan brush, pick some of that up and just add some splatters, bottom left to top right. That's my preferred pattern, but you obviously can do whatever you like. There we go. And then we just need to either heat dry that or leave it to dry for a minute or two. So I'm actually going to let mine dry, which is going to give me some time to do a little bit of clearing up. So I'll get that clearing up out of the way and then we'll be ready to move on to the next stage. So I've done my little bit of tidying up and I'm looking at my image now, and I feel like I need to have something that's going to frame this and draw your eyes into the centre. So to do that, I'm going to put some blue distress ink around the edge, and I'm using broken china. I've got a really large soft brush here, which will give a softer, more diffused effect, but of course you can use any brushes that you've got. So you could use one like this, for example, which is just a regular oval brush, and you would just, you know, apply it gently. So I'm going to pick up some of that blue and just start adding it round the edges, and if you can get hold of a really large brush like this, or the ones that have the handles on the top, or the ones that are kind of diamond shape, they all are brilliant when you just want to add some soft edging without having to worry about having too many lines or rough edges. So all of those things will work really well because they just give a softer finish. The bigger the brush, the softer the finish, generally speaking. So that's always something to bear in mind, and that's why you'll see me use a variety of different sizes of brushes, some with soft bristles, some like the Lili ones with quite stiff bristles, because they give me more control when I want to be more precise, for example when I'm creating these stencil shapes. So that's always something to keep in mind. And whilst I was talking about that, I pretty much added enough blue around the edge of my picture now. There we go. So that's adding a bit more of a frame to my picture. And I just wipe up, because although we can't see it, there will be blue ink resting on my glass mat. So I don't want that to come back to bite me later on. There we go. And now we're ready for the exciting moment, which is to reveal the images underneath these masks that we've got. So I'm just going to carefully pull them up. And as a rule, it's a good idea to go from a wide area and pull towards any small areas, which will prevent ripping and tearing as much as possible. So there we've got another one there, another honey pot. And there you can see now this honey pot is in front of the bear, and the very first honey pot that we stamped is right at the front there. Now, where I originally put my grounding in, obviously I put this honey pot over the top of that, and so there is a bit of grey down there, but I am actually not worried about that at all, because we're going to cover that over with our colouring, which is what we're going on to next. So we're going to do some alcohol pen colouring. But before we do that, I think I just want to get my little faux border onto my card before I do that, so I don't forget. And to do that, I'm going to use a blue pen in cornflower blue, which is a colour that I'm going to use on the bows on my little honey pots here. And I'm going to drag a border around the edge there. So I've got a piece of spare card, and using my usual technique, I want the wedge end of my pen, and I'm going to just line up my piece of spare card close to the edge of my main image, and then holding it down firmly, I'm just going to be brave and drag all the way down like so. And I'm going to do the same all the way around. And this works better if you do actually just sort of be brave and just drag it quickly, because that will prevent the ink pooling too much in any particular area, so you will get a smoother result by doing it that way. And what you want is a nice sort of thickish piece of card to use as your guide. There we go. I wouldn't use a ruler, in case you were wondering about that, because what happens is the ink, residual ink sticks to the plastic on the ruler, and when you move it, it will smudge. Whereas if you use a piece of card, the extra ink, I don't know if you can see, soaks into the card, and that's not going anywhere. So it's a much better method to use. That's just for me. But of course, you know, everybody does their own thing. So if you prefer to do it with a ruler, of course you can. It will give you the same effect. Let's get started with our colouring now then. So I think we will start with our honey pots. And for that, I'm using my Ohuhu pens. I've got my Honolulu B, I think they're called. Never says on here, but it's the ones with the fine marker, fine tip and the brush tip on there. And I've got a variety of yellows, which I'm just going to grab, and a grey, which is a warm grey, which I'm going to use to create some shadow. So in order of light to dark, let me just bring those in. I've got Y120, Y140, Y180 and WG070 for my little bit of shading. So starting with my lightest colour, let's do this honey pot here first of all, and I'm going to just give the actual honey pot area a nice coat of this colour all over. And what we'll find is that this little bit of grey down here will just become shadow on the pot, so that's going to work nicely. And then I'm going to go with my medium colour. It's just deciding which way to do it really. And I'm going to flick from the edge into the middle. This is a rounded pot, so I'm just going to flick. And also I've just added a little bit of shadow at the bottom and the top, because the pot is behind the bow and the bottom end of the pot is bending backwards away from us. That's my thoughts behind that. And now I'm going to go to my darkest colour, which is Y180, and do the same process, but just tiny amounts of flicking just from the edge. And it's a very sort of rustic brown kind of yellow. In fact, it's probably more of a brown than a yellow if I'm being honest, but it works because it gives us that sort of bit of shadow that we need. It's kind of hard to get differentiation with yellow, I find, so you do need that sort of brownish colour. And then I'm going back to my medium, which is Y140, and flicking from the edge of the dark, bringing that in towards the centre there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with my pale colour Y120, from the edge of my medium and towards the middle, but not completely, because I want to have 2 layers of shade. So I've got, by doing 2 layers of this colour, I'm getting a slightly darker shade and then a highlight in the middle there. And then I am going to take my grey, which is WG070, and I'm going to, sorry, just trying to get the right end of the nib, add some extra little bit of shadows at the bottom there and under the bow. And as that dries, that's going to merge in, but just give that little bit of extra depth that we need to make it believable that this is more of a 3D object. And then I'm going to go and do the same thing on this other honey pot. So back to my light, which is Y120. Give that a nice colour all over. And remember, although it's facing the other way, this is in fact exactly the same honey pot, so we can do the same techniques that we just did on the first one. Today's going to be the day when I've got opening up my pens the wrong way round every time. There we are. That's my medium done. And in with my dark. And if you've got these pens with the brush and the fine nib, you might prefer to swap to the fine nib if you know, just to do these tiny areas, just so that you don't overdo it. It's entirely a matter of personal preference. And of course you can use any pen brand that you've got. This technique is about alcohol pens in general, not specifically Ohuhu ones, although they sort of are my favourites. You just can adopt the exact same technique with any brand of alcohol pen that you've got. So this will work for everything. The only important thing to remember is to use the right stamping ink. So you need a dye-based ink, and I tend to use Memento. As long as you remember that, you can use any alcohol pen that you like. Oh, sorry, jumped everything across there. So now I'm going to go with my my warm grey 070, and I'm going to add some extra shadow behind the pot, the first honey pot, and under the bow. Just touch that in, and that will fade into the colour as it dries. And the reason we use a warm grey is because it does have a sort of a hint of a brownish tint to it, so it actually merges much better with these brown colours than a cold bluey grey kind of thing. I'm now going to just add some simple dimension to the labels themselves, and for that I am going to a cold grey because I want a bit of a contrast. So I've got CG020, and I'm simply going to add some shading. So these are white labels, and I'm just going to colour in some shading, much the same as I did on my honey pot. So I'm going from the bottom, from the top, and just flicking in. And on this one it's going to be much more shady on the right hand side because there's a pot in the way, and I'm just going to leave it at that, and it's really as simple as that. So that's our honey pots done. Let's do the actual honey at the same time because we're going to use the exact same colours. So he's got his little I don't know what you call it, a honey dipper, which I'm going to colour all over with the Y120. And then I'm going to go to my dark one because these are quite small areas, so I just want to make sure I get that dark in there, and I happen to have opened it on my fine nib on this time, so I'm going to use that. And I'm just going to outline and draw some shade so it looks like as if it's sort of blobbing down rather than just being all flat. And then exactly the same, bringing in my medium this time, just bringing that round. And then I'm going to go to my warm grey, just add that extra bit of depth, which makes a world of difference. And I'm not being that particular about it, to be honest. I'm just adding something in to give, so it's not a completely flat piece of honey. Now then, the next thing I'm going to do, I think, is tackle the lids of the honey pots. So for that I have got a couple of shades of pink, and I'm going to use my cool grey again this time. So for my pinks I've got a really pale one, which is RV010, and still a fairly pale one, RV130. You could go for, you know, a really shocking pink if you like, or any colour you want really, but I just wanted it not to be white basically. So these are very small areas, so I'm going to tackle them both at the same time, starting with my palest colour, which I hope you can see on the camera because it really is super pale, RV010. And maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit actually. I should have done that at the beginning, shouldn't I? I'm just too excited to get on with my colouring today. Have you noticed that? I keep making little slip-ups because I want to get on to the next part. So, yep, I am only human. Now I'm adding my darker colour, which is still really pale. And I'm just adding, I'm thinking where it's all sort of, you know, crunched up, where the paper has been gathered over the pot, I'm just adding some of that pink, and I'm just adding the pink on the edges of these little pots because they're also part of that covering. There we go. And then just to add a little bit more depth, I'm going to go in with my CG020, sorry, and just bringing in some shadow. And you just need the tiniest amount because your brain will do the rest of the work for you, basically. And while I'm there, I'm just going to add a second layer of that grey onto my honey labels just to give a bit more depth. And now we need to tackle these tiny little bows. And again, I'm going to do two colours, and I've gone for the kind of cornflower blue look. Which is the colour that I've used for the border of my card. I've got B340, which is lavender mist, and B350, which is cornflower blue, the very same pen I used here. And I'm just going to start off by colouring my bows with the paler colour. And the idea was it's just to bring a little bit of contrast and colour so that everything's not too brown, really. I think I missed a little bit of my underneath there. There we go. So I'm actually going to let that sit for a moment because I want it to dry, because I just want to add some very small swipes of colour with my darker blue, but I don't want to it all to blend in too much, so I'm just going to let that dry for a second. But what I do need to do is do the same thing on my little I'm not sure what this is, to be honest, but I'm treating it as if it's like a little plate or something like that. So I'm going to take my RV, actually let's start with the pink bit in the middle. So back to my RV010 and RV130. And let's just give that a little bit of a colour. And what you'll see is that although I've got different colours going on, I'm trying to come back to the same colours in different areas of my picture just to tie it all in. So while we're here, I'm going to do I've got the lids of my honey pots in these pinks, I've got the plate, and I'm also going to do our bear's ears and paws. So we've got sort of some connection between these colours rather than all like floating around randomly. And now I'm going to go with my darker colour, which is RV130. And I'm going to fill in the darker areas of this plate. And again, I'm just doing some sort of scribbly lines rather than a solid line. And I'm going to add some of that pink in the dark areas of the bear's paws and his ears. And with those, I'm not even going to blend them, but I'm going to just come back with this pink and just give a little blend on the edges there, but still trying to leave one layer of that original colour in the middle, so I just get a little bit more lightness and highlight in the middle there. And then what I can also do is add that feeling of shade with my CG020 and just bring in some shady outline there, just to represent the fact that we've got objects in front of the board or the plate. So that's quite quick to do. Meanwhile, let's come back to these little bows now, and I'm literally going to just draw some lowlights this time, which is just lines following the artist lines on the bow and just adding a little shadow on the base of the knot, and that is as simple as it gets with those. Next, coming back to my bear, I'm going to outline the plate with the blue, same blue. So again, we're making a connection between the edge of our piece of card, the bows, and the plate. So sort of bringing it some cohesion, basically, I guess you'd say. And I don't know if that's the right thing to say or if even that's a proper thing to do, but to me that just seems to bring the picture together, and also it means you're not having to have so many colours to actually do your art. So again, I've just added some shadow by drawing a line, and I'm not going to blend, I'm going to leave those just as they are. And that leaves us our lovely little bear. Now for him, I want him to be brown, but I want him to be a different sort of brown to the sort of browny yellows here and the browns there, so that he actually sticks out a bit from the picture. So for that, I have chosen, I don't even know what you would call them, just a different type of brown. I can't really describe them, but I'm just going to grab them and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So I've picked my colours. I've got E380, E400, and I've brought in my WG090, which is a darker shade of the warm grey, which I'm going to use for the shadows. I guess you'd say that these browns are less of a reddy brown. These are sort of quite a reddy, orangey brown here. So I'm going for a more sort of ruddy kind of brown, if that makes sense. And we're going to start with the lightest colour, and I'll start with a small area that feels sort of less intimidating, if you like. So I'm going to do his arm and just cover the whole of his arm with that colour, and you can start to see the kind of colour I'm going for. I guess it's kind of a mink colour. My medium colour is E400, and what I'm going to do is start to bring in some shade, and I'm sort of dabbing the shade, so I haven't got an exact line around the edge, and some of it might even be dotted. There we go, because this is a furry creature after all. And then I'm coming back with my light colour and I'm dotting around the edge again where that dark colour ends, and just bringing it towards the middle to see what we've got, and trying to leave a little bit of highlight. I don't know if it's going to show too much, but that's what we've got. So in the end we end up with something that looks maybe a little bit fluffy. If I bring that up, there we go. So that was very easily achieved just by dabbing rather than drawing a line. So let's do the same on this other arm on this side. We are going to go in with our light colour. Just for a horrible moment then thought I'd still got my medium, and give that a colour all over, and then quickly go in with the darker colour and just start dabbing around, making sure we go to the edge roughly, in any area where we think there's some shadow. And then back with our lighter colour, and you can dab that back into that darker colour to add further texture again if you wish. And then we got our grey WG090. I'm going to bring that in just to add some further depth of shadow, and I might have to come back with my dark brown after this because it's quite a deep colour. So back to my darker brown, and let's just fade that out a little bit by doing that same dabbing motion. And also I did take out quite a lot of that colour, I think, with my palest one, so it kind of needed a little bit extra as well. Back to my light colour, just some gentle dabbing once again. There we are. Let's go down to the feet now. So we've got 1 foot here and 1 foot over here. I'm going to tackle those both at the same time. And I haven't got a lot of room, sorry about that, for dabbing here, so I'm just literally going to add my darker colour in there in a sort of smooth fashion where I think there needs to be some shadow, and then come back with my light colour just to blend that out a little bit. And as you can see, I'm not really paying much attention to that blend at all. I'm just letting it do its thing. And then we've got the underside where he's sitting on the floor. So once again, we'll tackle that with the light colour. And coming in with my darker colour. This bit is sort of going to be completely in shadow, so where his legs go up to his body, and then I'm just going to add some more shadow in here. It's kind of looking a bit square, but we haven't got much room to work really. And I'm going to quickly come in with my dark grey and just bring that in now while that ink's still nice and wet, and hopefully that will blend a bit more, but I do want to get that sort of contrast. And underneath that plate there, I'm just sort of doing a little line and some dots and dashes basically, just to give that idea of shade without it being too much of a solid line. And we're just bringing that light colour back in just to blend that out again. And I've realised that probably I just need to put some of this darker colour on the edge here. And I can just bring some dots in, just to add texture, just to soften out that shading. And now onto his head, which is actually the biggest part of him, to be fair. So I left that till last. But once again, I'm going to start colouring the whole of his head. So I'm starting with his ears. There's not going to be too much going wrong with those. And then I'm going to colour the rest of his face, just leaving out his nose roughly, or his snout, and going around those eyes. Now if you do go over the eyes by mistake, it's not the end of the world, because you can add that white highlight back in with a gel pen if you so desire, so not really a problem at all. There we go, so that's our light colour. And now I'm going to go with my darker colour. First thing I'm going to do is just do some little flicks around the base of the ears. And don't forget, you can turn your work around if that helps as well. There we go. And we're kind of going to start adding that dark colour and recognising that he's going to have shadow down here where there's a lot going on with his arms and his head curving and the plate being in the way and all the rest of it. So especially as usually the light's coming from above. So I'm just going to add some shadow in here like that and fading it off to the top, which will be the lightest area of his head. And then coming back with my light colour, I'm going to just add some extra blending there. And what I'm doing is roughly colouring so that I'm going to have 2 layers of the light colour and 1 layer of the light colour, which will give a little bit more depth and dimension. But what you're also trying to do is remember that the eye area wants to be light. You want to draw attention to the eyes. Now that's still quite solid, so another little trick you can do is to bring in your darker pen and just start dotting around the edges and start to fade that out. And we can do that up here as well, which also gives that feeling of fur that we're looking for. So I'm just tapping very lightly, and then I'm going to do the same with my lighter colour, starting from where I left off with the darker colour and then coming in a little bit on the edges of that area where I've gone into the light. And if you like, you can add a few more, just randomly to add some texture. Just a few little loose dots around. There we are. So if I bring that up, hopefully you can see that just by adding dots, I've taken the eye away a bit more from the actual blending part. And for the ears, I am just leaving them as they are with a direct contrast, just because it just adds a nice little bit of texture. And I'm going to go back to that pink that we used for the plate and the honey lids. And this is the darker one of the two. I'm just going to take that and just blot under the eyes, just to give some little bit of indication of rosy cheeks, which hopefully you can just about see. There we go. And now we're just going to deal with his nose. So the sort of snout area, I'm just going to colour with my palest brown and leave it pretty much exactly like that. And I have one more shade of brown, which I'm going to bring in now, which is E430, which is a much darker brown. And I'm going to use that for two things. One is for this little stick on the honey dipper, and part two is for his nose, which I'm just going to colour in exactly like that. And then we have pretty much finished our colouring. But what I want to do now is just to bring a little bit more interest to this scene by adding in a few little bees. So let me just get my picture back of my stamps. So you'll notice on here we've got some really nice little interesting bees, which we can add on and to add interest and just to build that scene a little bit more. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to randomly select a few of these bees and I'm going to stamp them on top of everything that we've already got. They're so tiny it's not worth masking them, to be fair. And I'm just going to colour them, and if the colour comes through, that just adds to the texture. So I'm going to just select a few bees and I'm going to stamp them directly using a little acrylic block. I've got bee number 1 lined up on my acrylic stamp, and I'm going to use my memento once again to give him a little stamp. And the idea is that he's going to be coming in from the side here. So just stamped him up, and I only get one shot at this because I'm using an acrylic block rather than my platform. So let's get him nicely in position. I think I'm going to have him around about here. Just give him a little press down to make sure his stamp's okay. Yep, that's good. Bee number 2 is the same sort of thing, but he's facing the other way, and so I'm going to have him round about here. Where shall we have him? Let's have him looking up in disbelief at the cheeky bear who's taking that honey. And finally, bee number 3 is a little tiny one, and he's going to be flying away off in the distance up the top here. So let's have a look at him, and let's put him over here. So I've gone with 3 because odd numbers are usually better than even numbers. So that's what the thinking is behind that. And now we're going to do some very simple colouring using the same colours that we've already got from our palette. So I'm going to start with their wings. I'm going to make them pink wings just because I've used pink elsewhere. And I'm going to go with the palest pink, the RV010, because I want them just to be a hint of pink, and they're actually kind of see-through, the wings. So I actually want the colour to show through from the other little bits that I've done. So there we go, just going over all the wings with that pink. And then I'm going to take my palest yellow, which is Y120, and I'm going to do all the faces and some stripes on my bees. I prefer to do the faces in yellow so that they're more visible. And then I'm going to go to my darkest one, which is a Y180, and add my shadow in there. Just making them look round by adding little bits of colour to the top and bottom of their bodies and around the edge of the head. And this one is so tiny that I'm just adding one little bit there. And then I'll go back to my palest yellow and just give that a little blend. Now, if you didn't like the idea of colouring something this small with your alcohol pens, you could of course go in with pencils if you like to colour your bees. It's really a matter of personal preference. Now I'm going to go, sticking with the same greys, I'm going to colour my dark stripes on my bees. So I'm going with my WG070 and WG090. And I'm just going to fill in those dark bee stripes. I'll come back to the stingers in a moment. And on this tiny bee there, that's him done. And then with my darker colour, WG090, same thing, adding a little bit of shadow top and bottom to give the bees an appearance of roundness. Back to my pale colour, just to give that a very slight touch on the edge of those dark areas, just to blend them and soften them a little bit. And normally my stingers I'd do in a in black, but because of the way the stripes go on this, there's no room for that. So I'm going with my darkest yellow, which is the sort of browny colour, and I'm just going to add those in. So that's the bees coloured very quickly. And then just as a final touch to draw us into this picture even more and frame it, I'm going to use my fine liner pen. This is a 0.3 in a uni pin. And I'm going to draw my usual wobbly lines around the edges here. So to do that, I'm just going to gently drag my pen down with a few wibbles and wobbles. Go all the way around the edge of my picture. And then repeat the process, doing some more wibbling and wobbling so that I've got a double line around the edge there. There we go. So now we are ready to mount up on some card and finish off the final card. Okay, so a quick tidy up later, and I'm now ready to get on with mounting my card. I've picked some cardstock out, which is a rustic brown colour, and the idea is that that kind of corresponds with the dark areas on the honey pot. So again, bringing those colours together. And I'm just going to make this little scene the main focal point of my card. So I'm not going to fuss with papers and lots of matting and layering. I'm just going to frame it with this brown card. Just like that, which I measured at 5 1/4 inches square. And then I have my 6x6 card here, which I'm going to add my matted and layered piece to. And for those that are interested, the glue that I'm using, which is my preferred glue, is the Pinflair book binding glue, because it's got a relatively low water content, so it will stick quickly. You need to be aware of that, but it means that as it dries, it's not going to pull against your card and make it sort of curve, which if you've got too much water in a glue, that's what will happen, and you end up with a sort of concave shaped card rather than a nice flat card, which is what you want. So that's my final card. I'm just going to grab my backing area so that you can get a nice shot of the card in its final completed state. And there we have it, one completed card with a cute honey bear. We've done multiple masking techniques, we've done stenciling, we've done adding background and texture, and we've done some lovely colouring with our alcohol pens. So hopefully there's a lot that you can take away for your own card making skills, or just for your colouring fun using these techniques. So it only remains for me to say, as always, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. Please feel free to share this video with your friends and share that crafty love. I'm all about sharing the crafty love. So I hope you enjoyed this video today, and I really look forward to seeing you back here again sometime soon. Meanwhile, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye!